My name is GUIDO IMBENS. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and so I was a student in the Netherlands, then I went to England, and then from there to the US where I did my PhD. And I've been living there and working there ever since, moving around between the East Coast and the West Coast a couple of times. And since 2012, I've been a professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University in economics. Yeah, because that is very interesting, very strange experience. It's a very funny way that it's set up. They don't tell you anything before, so you have no idea you're actually on the short list or you've been nominated. So it's all a big surprise. And so they call you on at about 11:30 in Stockholm. So for me that was it's about 2:15 in the morning in California. So I was asleep. I actually missed the first call, but they called back a couple of minutes later, and so I get a call. I get woken up, and they tell me, "Congratulations, you've been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics." And then they say, "Well, we're going to have a press conference half an hour later." And so you have half an hour to get ready. And so my wife woke up the kids, and everybody got very excited. You have half an hour to get ready, and then just all hell breaks loose. You start getting telephone calls and emails immediately. There's this flood of telephone calls coming in. Stanford actually sent some people over right away, because they get a call from the Nobel Foundation immediately after I got the call. So they sent some people over to help with the press and to take some pictures and video. Actually, they did an incredibly good job. They had the idea of having my kids interview me. So the kids asked some questions. Still, this is like 3 or 4 in the morning or so. And they made a very nice video of that. It was for the work I'd done on causal inference, not causal inference. The NPR apparently they said that morning that Josh Angrist and I had received a prize for our work on causal relationships, which wasn't quite right. So what we've done is try to figure out how you can help policymakers understand causal effects in settings where we can't do randomized experiments. Of course, in medical settings, often when we try to evaluate new drugs, we do randomized experiments. But it's often very difficult in economics. We can't do an experiment to see what the effect of going to high school or going to college is on earnings. We can't just randomly send some people to college and prevent others from going there. So we need to work with real life data where people make choices and kind of pursue their own interests and decide whether to go to college or not. And so then from that type of data inferring what actually the causal effect of going to college is, what would be the difference between your earnings if you went to college versus earnings for the same person had they not gone to college. That's kind of much harder, and we developed new methods for that made that more credible. And that's been very influential in economics, where of course very often the causal effects are exactly what we're interested in. You would think that if people would go to college may be different for lots of other reasons. They may have parents who are better off, or they may be smarter, and they may have made more money anyway. So it's kind of trying to disentangle the correlation, and you see a very clear correlation between going to college and earnings, but trying to disentangle that correlation, that's the spurious part of the correlation from the causal part. That's the challenge. That's the things we worked on, and we kind of show that in some cases there may be some idiosyncratic differences between people that may affect their decision whether to go to college or not, or whether to get more education. And that'll help disentangle the causality from the spurious correlation. Yeah, no, in fact it is. At some level, it's just what now would be called data science, part of applied statistics, and it's being used in all different parts of social science, as well as in biomedical settings, where even though they do a lot more randomized experiments than we typically do in economics, there's also lots of settings where they only have observational data, and where it's very helpful to use these methods to still get credible causal effects. So another example, one from the early days of econometrics in the 1920s, was trying to figure out what the effect would be of changing prices on sales. And so there, the challenge is about how to disentangle supply factors and demand factors. But all these questions are really about causal effect. What's going to happen if I intervene in the system, if I change something? For the government, there may be changing tax rates or changing interest rates or changing monetary policy. And for a company, there may be changing prices or changing advertising. And in a medical setting, there may be giving people this drug or some other drug, or giving them this particular treatment regime, the sequence of treatments. So these questions do come up in lots of different disciplines, not just in economics. But economists have traditionally been very focused on that type of problem. Yeah, so I think that's a very good point. So in statistics in the 1920s and 1930s, people were also very interested in studying causal effects, but they looked very much at randomized experiments, and they were doing this in settings that were quite different from the ones that economists were studying. They were looking at agricultural problems. I have a plot of land, I'm going to put fertilizer A on there, or some other fertilizer, and what is the effect of that? Because the plots of land don't care, they don't make decisions, they don't have preferences, and so they're very passive. And economists were looking at settings where there's active people making choices. I decide whether to go to college or not, given what I know, what information I have at that time, what my constraints are. But I'm making an active decision, and the same kind of with consumers going to a grocery store. They decide to buy apples or oranges depending on what is available, what the prices are, what their budget is, and the same in the labor market. Individuals decide to look for a job and accept a job depending on what conditions are offered by a company. But people make very active decisions, and that makes it more complicated to disentangle the causal effects from the correlation. So of course that's one of these settings where it's very hard to do a real randomized experiment. But what we need there, and what economists traditionally do, is a combination of building models for kind of thinking about how consumers are going to respond to increased prices, how the companies are going to change the prices in response to the tariffs, where these companies take into account what they think the customers are willing to pay. So if I change tariffs on a particular product, the company could raise the prices in the country that they're exporting to by the same amount and pass it all through to the customers, but they may think that the customers are not willing to pay that and they wouldn't buy the product anymore. So they may not increase the price by quite as much. So everybody is kind of trained to take into account how other agents in the process are going to respond, and then determine their own response as a function of that. But in the end, it is likely that sort of a combination of having good data there, and one of the side effects of all these rapid policy changes in the US at the moment is that we get very good data on how different parts of the economy respond, because there's a lot of somewhat erratic. No, I think economists generally think that increasing the tariffs was not a good idea. So it's often modeling these steps separately, and so in the end, customers don't really care whether prices go up because of tariffs or because some of the raw materials went up in price for other reasons. So they don't really care about the reason the prices go up, they just care about the increase in prices itself. And so you may be able to get a handle on how customers are going to respond to prices, and that is then being used by the companies that sell these products to decide how much of the tariffs they're going to pass on to the customers. And that's going to differ for different types of products. For some things where there's no alternative, the companies may pass the prices on, the increases in tariffs on completely to customers, but for other products there may be much less so. In general, my work is part of what Josh Angrist labeled the credibility revolution, where we're trying to make the empirical work in economics more credible. And because there have been a lot of other people involved in that as well. But nowadays, in economic work, you see, in empirical work in economics, you see people trying much harder to be very clear about what assumptions you would need to make to be able to draw these policy implications, to draw these conclusions. And you see that overall the credibility of that work has been much improved. From my perspective, there's still a lot of work to be done. There's kind of still areas where causal inference has not had as much of an impact as it should have. And for example, all the work on AI, I think, is incredibly interesting, but a really big next step is trying to bring causal reasoning more systematically into that area as well. At the moment, the large language models are essentially predictive models. They're trying to predict the next word in a sequence, and that has been incredibly successful, but there's clearly still a lot of limitations where they're not necessarily very good at making causal statements, making statements about what would happen if we actually change something in the world. So finding ways of integrating causal reasoning into the AI capabilities and methodologies, I think would be very interesting. Of course, that's relevant for economics, but it's relevant for lots of other disciplines as well. We need to understand the causal mechanisms and the causal effects. But a tricky part of that is that unlike the predictive modeling, where we have vast amounts of data to train these models, we don't necessarily have as high quality data for training the models for causal reasoning, because we need to have data that is grounded in the truth in a way that most of the standard data for training these large language models is not. Parts of it didn't really change very much. I'm still teaching. I was teaching on Wednesday morning. So part of my life didn't change very much. I had a great job before. I loved doing the work. I loved working with the students. So that part didn't really change. Kind of other parts did change. It sort of opened up a lot more doors. I got to meet really interesting people. One of the really nice things actually is when you go to Stockholm, they have this whole week of festivities, and you meet the people from all the other disciplines, and that was really interesting seeing what they were doing, what they were working on, and so it sort of makes you part of this community that is just a really interesting community. Meeting the people who win the prize in literature, kind of talking about how they think about their books, what kind of books they think are interesting. So that part has been very interesting, and also now I spend more time meeting with people outside the university, with policymakers, and that's been interesting. But large part of my job really haven't changed. I still love doing the research and working with the students. And so the only trouble is that there's not enough time to do all the interesting things that are now possible. In some sense, that's a great thing about being at a university like Stanford. The year before, someone else in economics, two other people in economics won the Nobel Prize. The year later, Caroline Bertocci won in chemistry. So there's lots of other people with Nobel Prizes too. So it doesn't really make you all that special there. I feel I've just been incredibly fortunate in being at the right place at the right time. So when my first job was at Harvard University as an assistant professor, and Josh Angrist was there at the time, and that was really that was not the reason I went there, but that turned out to be incredibly fortunate for both of us, because we ended up collaborating there in the first year. We only overlapped there for 1 year. We ended up collaborating and doing a lot of work together. That was the foundation of the work for which we got the Nobel Prize. So the huge amount of it is just being very fortunate, being in the right place at the right time, where other people might have had similar ideas and could well have done similarly had they been in the right place. So I don't think of it from that perspective as being so special, just largely being very lucky. But now I do think that the whole area is very important, and so this has put me in a position where I can help promote that work and promote other people's work in that area. And so it allows me to kind of to shape the direction of the field in a impactful way. Sort of over time, the work had gotten much more recognition. You know, initially, when I did the work, I thought I was really happy with it. I thought it was really interesting, but it took quite a while for it to get recognized as such. I didn't actually get tenure at Harvard, even though I'd done that work by that time. But over time, it clearly had gotten more recognition. But in economics and most of the other disciplines, people tend to win the Nobel Prizes much later in their careers, kind of when they're in their late 60s, I think, on average. And so I wasn't really, that wasn't really something that seemed very likely to be happening anytime soon. So I wasn't really paying attention to that. So it came as a bit, and again, they don't tell you you've been nominated or you're on the short list, so I had no idea really, and there seemed to be, I mean, I knew a lot of the other people who had won before. As I said, the year before, two people from Stanford had won, but they were in their 70s, and so it just didn't seem something that was really very relevant for me at the time. I think it's incredibly helpful to have these prizes in promoting science, because one of the big challenges at the moment, and this is of course particularly true in the US, is that the science is not viewed as favorably as it used to be. And I think that's very unfortunate. I think the universities and science kind of in general have contributed enormously to society as a whole, sort of by training people, but also by the things people have come up with. I read recently in a book that about 30% of US GDP can directly be attributed to things discovered in physics in the early part of the 20th century, kind of all the quantum the methodology and general relativity. All the things people discovered in those days kind of impact daily life now to an enormous extent. Kind of all the stuff that is in computers, that is in smartphones, all these things go back to pure science from the 1920s and 30s, but what was viewed at that time as very esoteric and not necessarily very useful for science. So the universities have contributed enormously to the benefit of society, but we haven't really done a very good job in making that clear. And I think at the moment science is somewhat under attack there, and we need to show that there's incredibly good work being done, and that is really important for society. And I think these prizes are a big part of doing that, of promoting science. So one of the things the Nobel Foundation is very keen on is people actually doing outreach and going out into society and being a role model. So one of the things I do regularly is go to high schools and talk to the students there about the things economists do, about the things scientists do, to make clear that those things are important, interesting and impactful, and those are worthwhile careers to consider. Clearly still a lot of things, say in medicine, where we would like to find ways of improving cancer treatments or dealing with other diseases, or when there's infectious diseases. We'd like to be able to come up with vaccines quickly. And again, science there has been incredibly impactful in coming up with vaccines and getting rid of diseases and improving productivity in agriculture. And we're still facing huge problems. We may be very happy with our lives at the moment, but there's huge challenges involving climate change where we need to figure out how we're going to deal with that. And over the years, kind of over the longer horizon, the way humanity has typically dealt with problems is through science and through coming up with new ways of dealing with things. You think about the pollution we used to have in places like London or in the Industrial Revolution or in Los Angeles, kind of with cars, and how much that has improved because of new ways of dealing with pollution, say from cars or from factories. So I think we do need to continue investing in science and higher education. I think that's a big challenge, and that's of course where I think AI can be a great force for the good, but there's also a lot of challenges in making sure that we deal with AI responsibly, and that in fact it is going to be a force for the good and not for the bad. And it's certainly making it easier for people to spread misinformation and feed into conspiracy theories. So I think that's a big challenge, and so that's actually something that the scholars, the scientists need to work on too, to figure out how to deal with those challenges. I think at the moment there's certainly a lot of challenges coming from the government sector in not taking science seriously and not taking the higher educational system in general seriously and supporting that enough. I think that there's big problems there. Yes. Yeah. So I don't necessarily kind of see myself very narrowly defined. One of the great things after winning the Nobel Prize is it's very easy to talk to people. They're very happy to take my calls. They're happy to meet with me. So I talk to people in statistics, in computer science, in medicine, in chemistry, in lots of different fields. And the data science I do often has points of contact with what people in these other disciplines are doing. So I don't see myself kind of very narrowly as an economist. I think that's an ongoing challenge, and probably a much bigger challenge at the moment than there has been in the past. I think from the university's perspective, they've always felt there was not in there. But if you look over the longer run, investments in the higher education system or the education system as a whole have gone up over the years. But now there's really a big challenge in the US. It's not clear whether that's going to continue, and that could have big negative effects. We could lose entire cohorts who might have gone into science and into the higher education who may not do so, and that could set back progress substantially. But of course it opens up opportunities for universities in other countries here in Europe, in South America, in Asia, where a lot more researchers may be interested in working there. So over the years, I've been to many of the institutions here, and so I've worked with people here, and so I've been very impressed with the quality of the work here, and so I'll learn more kind of about the prizes here and the work kind of over the next couple of days. But it looks very impressive. I'm very happy they've set up this system of prizes. I think it's a great way to promote the research and researchers to be active in these areas. Yeah, so I've always really enjoyed the research, and so in the end, kind of what really motivates me is finding problems that I think are interesting, and so I tend to talk to a lot of applied economists, empirical economists, and researchers in other areas, and so that I'm just really fascinated by, and then these are just really rewarding careers where you can kind of think about problems and sometimes come up with solutions where it just feels incredibly empowering that you've discovered things that people didn't know before. And so I think, and the idea that this can actually be beneficial for society just makes it even more interesting. So I would strongly encourage people to think about these careers and realize that these can actually be really rewarding professions. That in the end, kind of trying to come up with these solutions for society's problems is a really compelling idea. So what I try to do is to disentangle spurious correlation from causal effects in settings where we don't do randomized experiments, but we have observational data.